Hi everybody and welcome to the ODI's Friday Lunchtime Lecture. Today's speaker is Mike Brondbjerg. Mike has come from a company called Kultur Design. Sorry.
That's all right.
And Kultur Design, a creative studio who specialise in the use of data in their work. And as you can tell probably by the title of today's talk, Mike is going to be talking about using data as a creative material. So can I ask if anyone has any questions in the audience, please wait until the end of the talk as we need to pass around the microphone. If you've got any questions and you're watching remotely, please use the hashtag ODI Fridays. And I'm going to hand over to Mike. Enjoy the lecture.
Thanks very much. Thank you for having me. Hopefully we've got some videos to play today, and hopefully that's going to look okay on the feed and everything. But if not, if you want to look at anything, and I've got to kind of whistle through a kind of a lot of the work. But if you want to look at it again, all the work I'm going to show today is on Kultur.design there. So Kultur Design is a little studio that I run with my partner Polly, so we work on data visualization and information design, motion graphics, illustration and branding, and generative and data art. And so we work on things like this, visualizing, sort of doing information design for kind of medical education videos, data visualization for corporate survey data, some of this sort of thing, sort of slightly more kind of looser visualizations, so we're looking at the press activity between two different companies, and designing apps like this with for 51 Degrees with the Away 3D guys, looking at mobile phone handset usage around the world, and you can see Apple doing quite well there. So that's that sort of work. But all that kind of work sort of sits down this. I'm going to kind of put our projects on this kind of spectrum of sort of visualization, if you like, and those projects sort of sit on that kind of insightful end of the data visualization come art spectrum. And basically the kind of the rule of thumb is the more kind of insightful you want to be with your visualizations, the kind of the more representative you need to be with that data. So, but we're going to kind of move up into this top right hand corner and use data as kind of a seed in our projects that isn't necessarily about insight, but more about kind of using it as a material in our projects and an input into our sort of creative systems. So, and that's data as a creative material. So why would you want to do that? Well, so your data kind of embodies your efforts and your relationships and your successes, and whether that's you or your product or your wherever it is you get your data from, but it just kind of reflects you and your activity, and kind of embedding that data in your creative process and in your design process it kind of brings a kind of an honesty to it somehow, and it's like it brings a reality rather than the visual output you create being kind of arbitrary. And so I'm quite into the idea of creating a system, a drawing system, and then putting in a data or some sort of input into that system and seeing what it creates. So you create a set of rules, and kind of visualization is just creating those set of rules around how are we going to encode some sort of value into some sort of visual system. And so that's what all these sort of projects share, if you like, and moving sort of up the scale. So the first project I kind of did that kind of was balancing those two things out was for King's College. And this is a project we did to kind of visualize the rise and fall of nitrogen dioxide levels over London. And you can see it's kind of basically, these are all the air quality sites around London. But if you take all those sort of points away and sort of take the map away and make it completely unreadable, if you like, what it also does is create these nice sort of geometries, these kind of abstract geometries, which kind of work as a design tool as well. So it's taking that data, and I quite like the idea that maybe there was a pollution event over Heathrow near Heathrow, and that caused a particular sort of shape of that geometry, and that's sort of interesting to me as a designer. So a project some of you might have seen is I worked with Miriam Quick and Valentina De Filippo on this project Space Oddity, which was it won a Information is Beautiful award this year, I literally just helped out with some of the sort of the data animation, but it was lovely to work on with those guys. And what it is a visualization of David Bowie's Space Oddity. And they did a whole ton of different ways of visualizing that song, the sort of harmonics, sort of, the song structure, the vocal structure, the sort of the lyrical structure. And what this is kind of a map of reading like a clock. It's all that, basically every bar of Space Oddity, and each icon is a different instrument basically. And so in the center you've got a load of triangles sort of running all the way around, if you like, and that's the acoustic guitar sort of playing all the way through. And on the outside rim, so working through, you've got like bass and drums and kind of mellotrons and all that sort of stuff. And on the outside edge is major tom and ground control, sort of having this sort of conversation. And these sort of concentric circles on there are kind of the harmonies, the vocal harmonies, if you like. And yeah, it was great. They did an exhibition at Wieden and Kennedy, and yeah, it was a really nice project to work on. So I'll just play a bit of that.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade.
So yeah, we're kind of using not only sort of mapping the sort of the bar data of what's playing when, but we're taking the audio feed from each layer of the audio of the song, each track of the song. So we've got animating the icons basically based on the audio data that's for each track. And sort of restructuring that visualization as well. So it's the same system, but viewing it as a kind of a tunnel, a sort of a timeline, a sort of a 3D timeline rather than a circular timeline. And did some of this sort of generative sort of portrait work on it as well. So another project which kind of didn't start with data but kind of ended up with data is a project for Volanti Imaging, who's a little sort of drone photography company who wanted a brand developing and a website. So we talked to them about what that might be. This is my rubbish sketchbook about what that logo could be, and basically we came up with this idea of sort of concentric points, sort of like kind of radar points to say they're drones, so they're flying, and so the idea of a sort of this sort of radar, and then basically if you take those sort of concentric points and tip it up into on its side, you can see that those concentric rings are actually sort of arranged in a sort of funnel shape. So despite my terrible drawing, they went for that idea, and so we started working on the design, and so I do a lot of work in processing, and sort of the design is actually kind of not done in Illustrator. It's kind of sort of built as a kind of an algorithm, if you like, and a sort of parameterized system. So by setting that up, I can sort of play with the different angles and different ways of drawing circles. Maybe we draw hexagons instead, lots of hexagons, very simple circles which are triangles, fewer triangles, and try playing around with those parameters of the design. And what that led us to be able to do then, once we'd got this design sort of working, is plug in some data to it at the end, basically. So I'll kind of whistle through. So this is us working out how we're going to move those points around these sort of concentric circles, and this was quite a nice experiment because you get this sort of symmetry. The point on the outside's moving a lot, and the point on the inside's moving the least, and you get these little moments where they all kind of line up, and it's quite nice. But so we could move points around circles. And then we were playing with, okay, we don't want to draw all the circles, we want to draw just tails behind those little points. And so because the system that we designed was sort of parameterized, we could sort of play with different lengths of circles, different weights of points versus the tails, lengths of tails, and sort of iterated through lots of different ideas. Lots of points here. It's a bit faint, but you might be able to see that. Doesn't really liked it, doesn't really work as a logo necessarily. But yeah, so we settled on, in the end, a balance of, and this was the final kind of the sort of opening sting that we created for them that they could put on the front of their sort of videos. And the logo kind of works between like 12 and 24 points. So so there's the version with 12 points, and there's a version with sort of 24 points. And because it was kind of living logo and it could vary its form, we did business cards for them as well, where each one was different because we could output a different sort of a view of that vortex, if you like. But because we kind of built it as a system, we could also on their website use the open weather map API. So what we're doing is basically looking at the weather in London at the time. So when you visit their website, it basically is taking two things from the Open Weather Map API, which is atmospheric pressure in London and wind speed. And so when we increase the atmospheric pressure, so this is just a demo, you get more closely packed particles, so kind of like isobars, and then as the wind speed increases in London, you get faster moving vortex. And so kind of by visiting their site, you can sort of get a sense of the weather in London, but it also kind of binds it to, because they're all about flying and weather, and they can't fly if it's bad weather, it kind of binds that to their brand, if you like. So working kind of systematically and sort of parameterizing that design meant we could do that at the end of the project. So this, you can see we're moving up the scale here, sort of abstracting data a bit more. Tiger Beer was a project we worked on with Havas in Dublin, who were really great to work with. And they came to us wanting actually a kind of like a generative portrait. Basically what they wanted was a Facebook application that Tiger Beer customers could generate a unique piece of artwork based on their profile image, and use that as kind of basically a beer voucher. So you generate some art, take that to the pub, and you get a free beer. So everyone's happy. Problem is, obviously, are there kids in the picture? Is it not the picture's not appropriate? So that idea kind of got shelved. So what else could we do with sort of Facebook data? So really very small data in the sense that we looked at visualizing their name, the Facebook user's name, encoding the letters of their name, and also the date of birth and the time of day that they were generating this piece of art. And those are all inputs into this system. So the way we sort of set about doing that, again, having just finished the Volanti job, I'm still doing dots on circles, basically. So basically, the way we're encoding those letters is basically reading from the middle out. So and an A is one dot on a circle, B is two dots on a circle, C is three dots, and onwards. And that's how we're kind of sort of trying to encode those letters. So playing with ideas of like, okay, well, if we've got those letters encoded, how can we do something visual with that? Maybe we join them all up from the middle. Maybe we sort of multiply them out a bit so they're a bit more dense, and also maybe draw some circles in the background of different density according to the value of the letter. So A is very light, B is very dense. But then they wanted it sort of more kind of Eastern inspired, more sort of on brand, and the art director created these really nice icons, and so we mapped these icons to the particular letters. So it's the same arrangement, but we're just adding a sort of a kind of a twist to it. But it's the same sort of encoding, but using icons as well, and they're scaled as well based on the letter value. So A is small, Z is big, and these set here. What was interesting when you apply the icons to it, it kind of made it a bit more readable in that these two are sort of related family members. So these are actually the Shelbys from Peaky Blinders, the TV series. Anyway, test data. So this is the Shelby brothers, and that's the Shelby sisters, and you can kind of see that reading from the middle, that's Shelby out on the outside edge there. And what was kind of interesting about it is you can't read that you don't know that says Ada Shelby, but sort of cultural differences sort of started appearing. So maybe like Chinese names were maybe quite short, and very high value letters were in there. So you got very kind of punctuated kind of designs, and Eastern European names maybe quite long, so you got very dense sort of designs. And so en masse, you've got this kind of sort of cultural difference sort of moving through the work. So that was the Facebook app. So we also produced it then. So the app was written in P5.js, which is processing's kind of JavaScript library. And then we took it and rebuilt it for processing on the desktop, and it meant we could output these high-res versions of this, which then got used at the Dublin Fringe Festival to brand up there. So Tiger was sponsoring the Fringe Festival, and we visualized the names of all the performers there. Use that system to generate all the banners and the t-shirts and the tote bags, DataViz tote bags. It was nice to see one algorithm kind of being applied to different platforms and different mediums. So I'm kind of interested in, when you're creating a system, I guess, for visualization, or a sort of a drawing system, if you like, finding data that's really sort of dynamic and sort of textural is kind of what I'm always after, and pulse data is great. So we've done I've done a few projects using pulse data actually, yeah. So what's great about pulse data is it tends to be very dynamic and kind of interesting, and sort of there's got a lot of texture in there, but it's also very personal. It is bound to the person whose data that is, and there's almost nothing more personal than your own pulse data at a particular moment in time and space. So how do we go about getting pulse data from live subjects? A 20 quid Arduino from Maplins, one of these pulse sensor that you plug into it, and it basically is reading the blood flow in and out of your skin, basically. So that's how it measures you can do it on your phone as well, you know. But yeah, so that's what it's doing. It's shining a light on your finger, and as the blood flows in and out, it's measuring that as a signal, and that's what you get out of it. So there's sort of two bits of data here. There's kind of the BPMs, which it's measuring, is working out between the peaks on that waveform, which isn't very interesting because it kind of, you know, someone's sitting there and it's 87, 88, 89, 87. It's not really doing much. You know, it might be interesting from a clinical point of view, but not from like an artistic point of view. But what's much more interesting is this sort of waveform that you get out. And so that's what we did. We took that waveform, that live feed, and passed it down basically a sphere. And sort of this is me a few months ago. And basically what we're doing is there are points on a sphere, and the higher the value of that wave as we're passing it down that sphere, it's displacing those points, and so pushing it away from their kind of their sort of base position, if you like, and then adding like a color scale to that, so the further they move out, and scaling them as well, so the higher the value, the more we displace those points. And so we did an event at an agency a couple of years ago, and sort of talking about this kind of work. And then what was really nice is afterwards we got everyone sort of lined up, and I should have brought it today, but got everyone lined up and took everyone's sort of pulse signature and got everyone to dance around at the time and get them to basically sort of capture their pulse at that moment in time. And after the event we sort of sent everyone sort of posters of their pulse, you know, their pulse at that moment. And yeah, so you get some quite nice variation in there. But yeah, it's that super personal kind of data. It's them at that moment in time through our algorithm, but that piece of work couldn't have been created if it wasn't for their heart rate and that dance that they were doing at that moment. So I'm keeping an eye on my time here because I don't know if I'm flying along or not, but we'll see how we go. Another nice place to get nice textural data is audio data. In the same way, kind of pulse data is that quite nice spiky sort of textural data. Audio, it works in the same way. And we were asked to do the opening conference titles for Reasons to be Creative in Brighton. It's like a 3-day design conference in the Brighton Dome. And it sort of started with us working on their logo. So the logo, basically, John at Reasons sent round their logo. It's like to celebrate 10 years of the conference. He sent it round to everyone he kind of friends he knew or people who have spoken at the conference to kind of remix their logo. And it's like, to celebrate that 10 years, can we come up with something new for that? And so we thought, how can we approach this logo and do something kind of generative or sort of data related to it? So first thing we did, and this basically builds into how we did the conference titles. First thing we did, split the logo into points, so we've got something to kind of work with, and it's not just a kind of an outline. Then apply some values to those points. So basically, the higher the value, just random values, apply those to those points, and it gives us an ability to kind of displace those points from their kind of their baseline, if you like. And so those are coming at you to the camera, if you like, and what that does is kind of slightly sort of is distorting that kind of logo form, if you like. But that's just some static values. So what if we started passing? So this is noise data. So like not noise data, but like random noise, like randomly generated, sort of naturalistic data. So or random values. So it's kind of, if you wanted to draw mountains or clouds, this is using Perlin noise, which is basically kind of, you know, so you get this kind of nice sort of flowing sort of data. And I thought, okay, there's something in this because it's doing this kind of nice fluid sort of distortions of that logo, that outline. But it is just arbitrary data. So I've got a friend, Joe, over on the left there, and he works with Ammon Tobin in this band Two Fingers, and he's based in Brighton. So I thought, what better than a Brighton-based band to give us some music, to give us some audio, to pass through that drawing system instead. So, and Joe was kind enough to write us some music for this logo, sort of remix. And this is what we got. So we've played with it a bit more and sort of worked on, you know, the higher the values, you move over that color grade again. Change the way we're drawing the lines a little bit to make it feel a bit sketchy. But yeah, these are the kind of the variations. So I don't know how to draw that. I can't draw that, but in Illustrator. But you set up a system, you pass some data through it, and find and sort of curate the best results from it, if you like. And yeah, so that's how we did the remix. So about a month before the conference, John, the organizer, phoned up and said, "Can we do the conference titles for that year?" Nervously, because people like Stefan Sagmeister and Mario Klingerman and Jared Tarbell were all my heroes. Joshua Davis were all talking that year, and it's like there's a bit of a, you know, bit of an ask and a bit intimidating. So, but we went for it, and so basically we used the same system, but this time, instead of having to be locked to a kind of a little white square, we could actually sort of put our camera inside of that visualization and explore it more kind of cinematically, if you like. And so everything you'll see here, it's a bit faint, this video, but all the color, the way the color changes on the model, the way the camera shakes, and the way the logo is kind of deformed, is all driven by the audio that's playing. So yeah, here we'll play a little bit of that. So yeah, so you know, I can use After Effects a bit, but I don't know how to do that, if you like. Do you know what I mean? So it's like being able to write a system and pass that in, you know, pass data into it, gives you that ability to sort of generate, generate forms that you can't do manually, if you like, or it would be very sort of labour intensive to do. Moving now kind of at sort of furthest reaches out here into the kind of data art come generative art world. So a project we did a long time ago is this project called it's a project called Dead Presidents, and what we're using here is kind of image data really, and a digital image is basically kind of an array of pixel values. Yeah, so it's a two-dimensional array with RGB and alpha values in each one of those points, and sort of looking at I guess what we do is create a system and then sample from things, and sort of, you know, whether you're sampling from audio, whether you're sampling from you know, a pulse sensor, it's much the same sort of process. And so what could we do? How could we think about image data in the same way as other data? So this is Dead Presidents. We created these drawings by basically moving our mouse, you know, writing a little algorithm to sample the color and form from these sort of existing classical portraits. And that was great. We created some nice art posters from that, but it was basically a manual process. I was kind of moving my mouse around and create a little drawing program. But I wanted to do the same thing automatically. I wanted to do it more algorithmically. So came across this picture of Square Pusher, who was you know, kind of a drum and bass guy, who a hero of mine, and thought, right, how can we create something similar to those Dead Presidents, but do it more algorithmically? So what we did, so when you're drawing these pictures, you work in the same way as you know, I was working in the same way as a kind of an oil painter would. You know, you build in big triangles at the back, you know, filling in lots of color at the back, and then working smaller and smaller and smaller, getting in on the later, getting smaller and smaller in on the details, basically, and yeah, sort of building it, finding where there's bits of interest in the image, where you want to pick those bits of interest out. So how are we going to basically pick out bits of interest in that picture of Square Pusher? So what we did is we converted the image using Find Edges, which is a filter you can do in Photoshop. And what that's doing, it looks like it's kind of inverted it, but what it's actually showing you is where is there contrast between pixels. So you can see there's sort of contrast in the eyes, there's some sort of where the light is in the eyes, it says there's something interesting there. There's not a lot happening up in the hair. There's some interest down the side of the face. And so if we sort of convert that to a sort of a lower resolution map, if you like, this gives us something, a kind of an interest map of where we might want to draw our big triangles. And then a finer grain map and a finer grain map of where we want to draw our increasingly smaller details. So that's what we did here. So here we're kind of now filtering and saying, only draw a circle where it's 80% interesting, if you like. And then only draw these circles where it's 60% interesting, 30% interesting, maybe 20% interesting. You can filter that image into your composition. And yeah, so build that up and you get this sort of composition, sort of layered up pointillism. And that's if you, instead of drawing circles, you draw those kind of big triangles and smaller triangles, this is what you got. So kind of like the dead presidents thing. But of course, as soon as you've got a system, you want to kind of play with the output. And so instead of drawing fixed, like filled triangles, we'll use the same colors to draw outlines, the outlines of the triangles. Try putting points on the end. Let's try use the color from that. Smaller points. And yeah, these are the kind of variations I actually ended up quite liking. But what I really liked was the one that kind of looked like a network diagram, and sort of animating those points and moving around a bit. Sort of feels like there's a sort of a, like there's a logic there, but actually you've got this portrait sort of emerging from that. And so we took that idea and turned it into a kind of a 3D motion graphics piece, and I'll play a quick bit of that. And this is Square Pusher's music, obviously. Still got some more to get through, so I'll rattle on. But yeah, like I say, you can watch these again sort of on our site later if you want. So we're really interested in sort of sampling from kind of non-standard sort of places, and just like the classical portraits, we're kind of interested in these sort of Dutch still lives. Now this is actually a photo by Richard Osterland he took in 2010, and this was work with him using this image for an installation in a hotel in China. Basically, this is for a sort of an animated installation. But we're using the same process here. Basically, finding where is interesting that image, sampling the colours from it, and drawing triangles, slightly twirly, a bit smaller this time, but ultimately the same thing. And the only difference here is that instead of clearing the screen every frame, I just let it keep drawing, basically. And what it does, when it keeps drawing, it kind of overdraws and creates these kind of like oil, sort of brushstroke type feel. So then this was another piece based on that same algorithm, same process, but quite different output.
While you are
you'll all be asleep. But basically, these are the kind of visuals that we sort of produced from that, and it was a 4K piece on these really nice high-resolution screens. So yeah, there was that. So my final piece, I guess, today is a new piece called Proximity Studies, and really it's not about data. It's kind of, I guess it's using geometry data in it, and positions of points in geometries, and it's kind of a bit about Brexit, in that we have this idea of, it was sort of inspired, I wanted to do something about Brexit, and this idea that if we're being pulled out of some sort of an organisation, or sort of an administrative organisation, I still have friends in Europe on these other networks, you know, on Twitter or wherever, that I will still be in contact with. And if one form kind of falls apart and corrupts, how long do those networks come together? And there's sort of or how long do those networks stay together, if you like? And so instead of it being administrative, you know, constructs, we sort of used sort of geometric constructs to kind of to sort of symbolise that idea. So concentric circles or spheres coming together and moving apart, and yeah, so that's what this is about, and sort of investigations into that. And so I'll kind of yeah, this is the last one today. There's more of that, but I think we need some time for some questions and answers, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's it for me, and yeah, everything's on Kultur Design if you wanted to have another look again. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Lots of really interesting graphics there. That was really cool.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions in the audience? Would anyone like to ask a question? Yeah.
I was just wondering, is there any resources where you can find great like open source data? I've looked into it a little bit and found things like Kaggle and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But do you use anything in particular for finding data?
I've got a big, like, massive favourites folder with, like, I don't know, it's quite often I'll be favouriting things from like museums or you know, sort of maybe sort of cultural open source stuff, you know, so like those kind of images that are, you know, interesting, or maybe interesting audio, that sort of thing. So I guess I'm focused less on, you know, the kind of statistical data, I suppose, than and then more on that kind of sort of visual and audio sort of data and that sort of thing. So yeah, I just got to keep an eye out, I guess, ODI. But yeah, so I'm not anywhere in particular. I just have and it usually comes through Twitter, to be honest. There's a kind of quite a good data viz sort of data art scene on Twitter, and just keeping an eye on that, and then when something comes in, I just grab it and put it in there.
Yeah, it was interesting seeing how you pull the data from.
It's all right, keep going, it's for the feed.
Yeah, it was interesting how you see pulling the data, turning into the visual stuff, but I also see that you've got a real interest in music alongside of that.
Yeah.
Which is likewise myself.
Right.
Have you tried turning some of the visualization back in that way?
Yeah, I've had that question.
Turning it.
Yeah, I've had that question before, and that kind of idea of because it really is using the visuals as a I guess a visualization of a system, if you like, and using that underlying system to generate, generative music is really interesting, I think, and it's like, again, another favourite in my folders.
People like the Algorave.
Yeah, exactly. And Dan, he was here last week, and he was big into sort of Algorave. I don't think he does it quite so much anymore, but Dan Het. But I really like that. And if to be able to blend the two, it's particularly live, is amazing that those guys do that. Yeah, it's sort of super interesting. But also, there's a kind of an idea of sort of audio visualization, and we're quite good at maybe not. We're okay at like taking visual cues from something to sort of assess the value of data, if you like, or the kind of the scale of data. But we're really good at audio as well, and it's kind of a much ignored.
Very synesthetic approach, really.
Yeah, and so the frequency and the rise and fall of pitch of something tells you a lot, just like a bar chart, or a line chart would, So kind of audio visualization is interesting, and that kind of blends into generative music, just like data visualization blends into data art, So yes, that would be great. I'd like to do that, definitely.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I just wondered if you could just briefly talk about your process of output in terms of the visualization platform. So how you output from a code set or whatever.
So, for instance, I do a lot of work in processing. So processing.org, you go there, it's free open source software, and it's a great, very easy to use, which is why I use it. And it's designed for artists and designers to use, and to create all sorts of things, print, video work. So what we do is we essentially will you could tap it into an API, an online API if you want, but say for instance the reasons titles using the audio, you can read that audio data directly, the levels, and using FFT to kind of, but that's a bit slow. So actually what we did was took all the audio level data, converted it into a CSV file of audio levels at 30 frames a second, and just read it in as a CSV, and then use that as an input into our system, and then output frame by frame by frame, a still frame every single 30 frames a second. Comp it back together in Premiere or After Effects and that sort of thing. But yeah, processing, great for that sort of thing. Yeah.
Hi. I have a question about the outcome. So before you do an experiment, if you like, do you have a vision and you're like, okay, it's going to look like this, or what's the balance between the surprise element of it and this is exactly how I wanted it to look?
Yeah, it's never what you expect, I don't think, and that's the nice thing, I think. You kind of have a sense of, say with the Reasons logo, it's like, okay, you've got a form that you're kind of trying to corrupt, if you like, so you've got a sense of what that might do. Or, okay, it's going to be circles or it's going to be spheres or something like that, so you've got a sense of that, but until you plug that data in, so a lot of it is fine-tuning how much you let the data influence it, maybe, and sort of tuning that in. But what's nice is, and I think as a designer you can kind of step back from it because you didn't make it, you kind of set these rules in motion, but you can just sort of judge it kind of impartially and go, that's a nice moment, that's a nice bit, that's not, but you didn't invest 2 days creating it and then going, I'm a bit disappointed, but I'm going to live with it anyway. You can be a bit more sort of subjective.
So is there a lot of that going on as well that we haven't seen? For example, the bits that didn't make
yeah,
it.
Yeah, exactly. So there is, it's a curated thing, and I guess that's where the where you can get into dodgy ground, I suppose, in terms of data visualization, and where the things you might be hiding is morally dubious, if you like, I guess. But in sort of where you're trying to be just more expressive, and you're not trying to tell anyone anything, you're not trying to convince anyone of something, you're just using it as an input, you can be a bit more selective about which bits of that audio are nice, which images are nice, which heart rates are interesting. Some people had really horrible heart rates and it just didn't work at all, so but that's interesting from a visualization point of view, but it doesn't necessarily make great art, if you like.
So have you ever kind of had like a moment where you use the data and you had an idea that it's going to somewhat look like this, if you know what I mean?
I think you do, because you're kind of you're very consciously setting up a the parameters first. You know, you don't just sort of throw it straight in and go, oh, what does it look like? You know, it's like, okay, I've still got to encode, I've still got to translate a value to some sort of visual form. So is it the circle getting bigger or smaller? You know, or is it colour that I'm mapping a value to a colour? And so you do have a sense of what you're trying to build, but it's the surprise of when that system comes to life that is when you go, is that good life or bad? You know, so. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I love the your take on the dead presidents.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
It is short. Which kind of analytics is behind of this visualization?
It's kind of raw data. There's no kind of necessarily analysis as such. There's no kind of statistical analysis unless that's already been done, if you like. So some of our kind of more regular sort of visualizations are visualizing statistical outcomes, if you like, but we're not doing any of that. So the audio visualization, I guess, is using FFT, which is like fast Fourier transformations to kind of analyze audio data, but we're not doing that. It's just taking an output and saying, in this frequency, what level what level of audio is playing at this frequency and this frequency. So there are libraries in processing to do that, to do that audio analysis. So, but very little. It's literally data screen, you know.
Any more questions? Yep.
What's the most practical application have you ever worked on? A lot of the stuff you've done is quite abstract and stylistic and for branding. But I can imagine there's lots of amazing. I used to work in a city, so to have a visual representation of what market volatility does would be amazing because it doesn't exist. So is there examples of stuff where you've put live data in and let sort of industry people make decisions on the fly?
Yeah, I mean, so some of that earlier work, sort of down in that sort of bottom left-hand corner.
I saw Dow Jones.
Yeah, that sort of, and this kind of thing. I guess this was for a Mobile World Congress, and it's looking at a year's worth of sort of average sort of mobile handset usage, and then this kind of thing, looking at experimenting with different ways of showing, activity, press activity between two different companies. So what this is actually showing is saying, Apple and Microsoft, who are they discussed alongside? In the press at that time in that year. And what you could do is move through the years and see how their market changed, basically based on, so in 2013 they were all being talked alongside Google and Samsung and Nokia, but in 97 it was all about Dell and chipsets and media rights and that sort of thing. So you could sort of see, but again, the more useful you want it to be, I guess the more representative you need to be and less artistic you can
I'm
be.
more thinking this is like contextual going backwards, but if you lose real-time data, you're going to really empower people in real time to make decisions based on.
Yeah, I haven't done. Not a lot. We usually it's fairly small data, curated data for a particular purpose, sort of thing. So that tends to be what we.
It'd be amazing from an ex-banker if you were sitting in a trading room, have a visual representation of what's going on live.
Yeah,
in ways that they never imagined before.
Yeah, and to give that sort of gist of a market rather than necessarily specifics. That's a very interesting thing of how do you represent some uncertainty, you know, in a big data set, because you can't be very specific at scale, can you? So you have to give a sense of uncertainty. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge for sure. But one I haven't solved. Yeah.
Some money in there, I reckon.
Okay, good to know.
Any more questions from the audience? Any questions from Twitter? No? Okay. I think we'll wrap up then. Let's give Mike another round of applause for a great lecture. Please join us next week for our next lecture, which is going to be about how open data revolutionised the transport in London.